It's nice to be among people who are passionate about fruit, because after I graduated from Cal Poly, I lived in San Luis Obispo, and I lived mostly in San Luis during the time I went to Cal Poly, but I moved over the grade because I wanted definite seasons and colder weather so I could grow deciduous fruit trees. And I have property there where I've lived since the late 70s, and I'm actually reinvigorating my orchard now. I have about a dozen deciduous fruit trees, a number of varieties that I enjoy looking after. And I will have to say that it is kind of a challenging climate, because if you get things that flower too early and set fruit, then it freezes in April and sometimes May, and you lose it. If it's inclement weather like this, the bees aren't out to pollinate during the flowering season. So it is somewhat challenging there, but still fun. I was asked again, as Seth mentioned, I'm on the board of the San Luis Obispo County Conservation Organization, which is a land trust. And Jenny, when she asked me if I would speak, originally they had asked a couple of members of the staff to be here today, and they weren't available, so they asked me to stand in for them. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the Land Conservancy so you have a better understanding of how that organization functions. And then, as Seth mentioned, I'll talk a little bit about our apple orchard that is just north of San Luis Bay Drive on the east side of 101 along San Luis Creek, and also include a little bit about the Bob Jones Trail that eventually will be the City to the Sea Trail, Class 1, not on any highways, but separate from the freeway and highways from San Luis Obispo to Avila Beach. Yeah. And I've got some updated information on that. But before I talk about those things, I want to say a couple of other things. First of all, thank you for the apple press that the club gave the Land Conservancy, and several members of your organization were at our apple picking back in October, and making apple juice for everyone that came out for that event. And we hope that becomes a tradition, and we can do that every year. So thank you for that. And also I wanted to mention, again, as Seth commented, I owned a Bay Laurel Nursery for several years. I actually went to work for the founder of that nursery in 1975 after I graduated from Cal Poly. A good friend of mine opened that nursery. He had it for 10 years. I worked for him for about the first three, and then I left to do other things, and then ended up buying it from him in 1985. He was ready to move on, and I owned it until 2000 and sold it to our employees, and they still have it today. And one of the things that we did when we were there, and by the way, they donated an interesting interspecific hybrid for your auction today, or your raffle. It's a cross between a peach and a plum. And so if you're interested in rare fruits, that's certainly one. And out on the piano in the living room, I brought several catalogs from Bay Laurel. If you're interested, it's bare root, and they'll be coming in anytime within the next week or so. And it's a good descriptive catalog of the different fruits that they carry. And if you're interested, they're on the piano. Also, I brought the most current newsletter of the Land Conservancy. So they're out on the piano as well, as long as, in addition to some other information that we have on the Land Conservancy. If you're interested in that, they're available. So let me start by giving you a little background about the Land Conservancy. We are a land trust, a 501c3 nonprofit. It was founded in 1986, and what we do, our mission is to conserve and care for the very diverse wildlands, ranches, and farms in San Luis Obispo County, and connect people to the land and to each other. That's our mission statement, and that's precisely what we are doing. We do that mostly through conservation easements, and if you're not familiar with conservation easements, what those are an agreement with the willing landowner, and we do purchase those mostly through grant funding, but also from contributions of members. The conservation easement is essentially buying the development rights of that property, and the idea is to keep that property intact, keep it from being developed, subdivided, and taking it out of agriculture or in other ways impacting wildlife habitat that would exist in open space, that would exist in perpetuity on that land. And conservation easements are a legal document that are recorded, and it ties up the land again in perpetuity. The use won't change. The ownership can change, but not the use. The ownership, the conservation easement goes with the land. We currently have about 20,000 acres in conservation easements, 30 to 35 properties. We also have several that we've purchased outright that we own, that the Land Conservancy owns. An example of that would be the Obispo Preserve. Many of you are aware of that. That area east of Shell Beach, mostly, and in between two residential subdivisions, 700 acres that will not be developed. And we have about 11 miles of trails. It's open to the public from sun up to sundown, except on days like today, we don't let people out there because it's impactful to the trails. So it's sometimes closed, but mostly open to the public. Just the front half of the 700 acres is available for trails. The back half is wildlife habitat. We've got a recording camera up there. We've got bears, mountain lions, bobcats, and all the other little critters that typically live in oak woodlands. So it's a very dynamic place in a predominantly residential area. So it's open space, that's one of our objectives. Another piece of property that we own is the Santa Rita Ranch, which is on Highway 46 West, about midway between Highway 1 and Highway 101. Just as you start climbing over the Santa Lucia Range, we have a ranch there that's 1,700 acres. And we just owned that for a couple of years. Eventually, we'll have opportunities for people to get out on that property and see it. It's pretty amazing. It's connected to 5 other ranches in that area that we have conservation easements on. So all of that area is preserved going forward.
Good work.
Yeah, good news. The other thing that I wanted to mention is we started out as a land trust, the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo County, again in 1986. We've become much more than that now. We are property owners that have properties like the Obispo Preserve, like the Santa Rita Ranch, that will be available to the public, either currently or in the future. We also have a long-term lease on the property around the Octagon Barn at the south end of San Luis Obispo. We completely restored that facility. It is one of only 7 barns like that. It was built in the early 1900s. It was a style used back in that time, mostly in the Midwest. It was a dairy farm, basically, in that area. and of San Luis Obispo County, and we restored that barn, and now it's an event venue. We restored the milking parlor there. In fact, the rear fruit growers may at some point want to consider having a meeting there. We have what was originally the shed, called the shed, that's been restored, and also a connection to the Bob Jones Trail. We have the old calf barn that's been restored and is bathrooms, and that'll be the trailhead plus parking for the Bob Jones Trail when that gets completed. And I'll speak about that in a moment because it's also connected to that apple orchard area south of San Luis Obispo. We also, in addition to the Octagon Barn, properties that we manage for public access, we have an education program for grade school kids. We have a program, it's called Learning Among the Oaks. We're currently in 3 schools, in 3 public schools in San Luis Obispo, and hope to open programs in 2 more schools, if not this year, next year. And what's unique about that program is,
You're going back there.
get out of the rain or put my hood on, one or the other. Yeah, we're both. That program is unique in that it focuses on 3rd graders. We have nature trails either on the school site or in very close proximity so the kids can go out and hike these nature trails and learn about what they're seeing. After they move on from the 3rd grade, many of them go through what we call an Oak Ambassadors program, where they take the information that they learned in 3rd grade as part of that Learning Among the Oaks, and they become what we call Oak Ambassadors. And they start teaching the younger kids. And they do that as they're in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. They become part of that program, and it's kids teaching kids. And that's a unique part, and many of those kids get very passionate about nature and about their involvement in teaching. So it has a lot of secondary and tertiary benefits to that original 3rd grade program that we have. And that's, in addition, there's one more thing about the Land Conservancy I wanted to mention, and that is that we also have a stewardship and restoration program. We have to take care of our properties as well as monitor the properties that we have easements on. It's required that we go out every year and take a look at those properties that we have easements on to make sure that the conditions of the easement are being met. So that's part of what our stewardship and restoration program does. We also have contracts with other entities to go out and do invasive plant removal as well as restoration projects. We'll work with agencies in the dunes. We have a contract with the city of San Luis Obispo to remove arundo from San Luis Creek. Those kinds of projects are ones that we also work on. We currently have about 20,000 acres in conservation easements. We've got several other projects in the pipeline. It takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to actually get a conservation easement through the process. The first step, first of all, we only work with willing landowners, most of whom come to us because they're interested in putting some sort of easement on their property so it doesn't change going forward. Many of them are multi-generational families. They've been here 3, 5, or even more generations, and they want to preserve their properties in perpetuity. And they'll come to us, and we will do that. The first thing we do is a resource evaluation of the property, document, or baseline study we call it, to document what's currently on the property. We do an appraisal. We draft an easement with the conditions for the easement. That'll be recorded at the county clerk's office once it's completed. Then we have to seek funding. And most of our funding comes through federal, state grants, as well as from contributions from our membership. And the grants typically come in cycles, so it may be 1, 2, or 3 years before money becomes available. They're competitive grants. We have to apply for those. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 years to get the funding. Once we get the funding, the project will go through a legal process, and once that is done, then we file the easement and it adds to our list. We currently have about 15 projects in the pipeline that will double the acreage that we currently hold. So in the next 3 years or so, we'll have over 40,000 acres in conservation easements. So that property will always maintain as a working land, either farming or ranching, be habitat, open space, and wildlife habitat. So that's in the works. I'm going to move on now, unless there are any questions about conservation easement and what the Land Conservancy does. Yes?
What about Oso Flaco? What is that? Is that under your jurisdiction or someone else's?
No, it isn't. Oso Flaco Lake?
Yes.
No, in fact, I think, well, Mark, you would know. I don't know. Oso Flaco is in San Luis Obispo County. You know, that's something that the state parks is interested in doing some sort of development down there, but we currently don't have anything with Oso Flaco. Just north of that is Black Lake Canyon.
Yeah.
We do have Black Lake Ecological Reserve there. We have a little property there that actually has monarch butterflies on it right now. They came back in the spring, and now they're on their way back and are overwintering there. I just learned last week that they are there. We do have hikes going out onto some of our properties and some of the easement properties every year. That's a benefit of being a member of the Land Conservancy. We take docent-led hikes onto some of the larger ranches that we have 1 or 2 times a year. And you'll get noticed of that, and you can participate in going onto these private properties that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. But I just also learned that, and we have to figure out how they do this exactly, but at the Black Lake Ecological Preserve, where the monarchs are currently gathered on eucalyptus trees, they identified one that was tagged in southern Arizona. It has a little number on its wing, and they saw it, photographed it, and it was tagged several months ago down in southern Arizona, and now it's visiting us in San Luis Obispo County. 525 miles or so that butterfly traveled to join its friends here in San Luis Obispo County. So it's pretty amazing. Let me move on to the apple orchard south of San Luis Obispo. I think you're probably all familiar with that. You see it from the freeway. Oftentimes, as you're driving by in the winter, all you see are the tops of those trees because it's in a floodplain.
Right.
And there used to be a lot of apricots along there as well. Those have all died and they've been pulled out. As you know, apples are somewhat tolerant of heavy soils and wet soils, and the apples have survived that periodic flooding. And currently, we own that area, those apple orchards there. Dr. John Debensinzi came to the Land Conservancy. First of all, those apples were planted in the early 80s by Dr. John Debensinzi, who was a local dentist. In the early 90s, he came to the Land Conservancy and asked if we would like to purchase that property, and we did. because we wanted to be able to offer an easement for the Bob Jones Trail and also manage that area to deal with the flooding problems that occurred there. And so we now own that property. We have at least 3 different entities that are continuing to manage the orchard and farm there. So it's still a viable, productive apple orchard and farming in that general area. One of the leaseors, or I should say leasees, we're the leaseor, they also not only manage that section of apples that they have on the property, but they also have areas for community gardens. If people want to come and put in a garden there and need space to do that, they also have a U-pick operation as part of their orchard. So that's happening. Let's see if there's anything else. I wanted to mention one other thing that applied not only to that apple orchard property, but also to our other property. I mentioned getting funding from federal, state, and grants, and also from our general membership. From the state, we typically get grants from the Coastal Conservancy, from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. There's a program that's called Sustainable Ag Land Preservation Program. We get funding through them for a lot of our agricultural properties. There's also a federal grant that's available designed to help protect military bases from being crowded out by development. So they make funding available to purchase properties or easements on properties surrounding military facilities or bases. We got several grants through that program to preserve some of the prime ag land along the Los Osos Valley Road between San Luis Obispo and Los Osos. That's a prime ag area, and because just over the hill is Camp San Luis, we were able to get funding to purchase several easements along Los Osos Valley Road, so that base won't continue to get pressured from development on all sides. So that's one of our prime areas to preserve agriculture is the Los Osos Valley, as well as the Chorro Valley, between Morro Bay and San Luis Obispo. So that funding is available. The Bob Jones Trail, I talked with Nick Franco, who's the San Luis Obispo County Parks Director, just a couple of weeks ago to get updated on the status of that project. And as you probably all know, the county received an $18 million grant to complete that section of Bob Jones Trail. And currently, I'm going to look at my notes here to make sure that I don't misstate some things. According to Nick, the CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, and environmental document, that's been completed. Which is the planning phase for that project. That's done. The trail construction documents are about 60% completed. They're currently working to complete the easements for the right-of-way to go from San Luis Obispo to where it currently starts off the frontage road just east of Avila Beach. He said that it would probably take about another year to complete all the easement work and get the permits to build the trail. After the permits are secured and they approve a construction contract it'll take about another year. So let's keep our fingers crossed. And in another couple of years, you can hike or ride your bike from San Luis Obispo off of county roads, off of state roads, all the way to Avila. And, yeah, that's exciting. Now, the Land Conservancy piece of that, in addition to the easement that goes through our property, which we're willing to give, that's a done deal. We also have the calf barn that I mentioned earlier at the Octagon Barn Center, which is a staging area now for the Bob Jones Trail. Lots of parking there, and the calf barn, which has been completely rebuilt. You'll see it as you drive by where the windmill is. That new building there, that'll contain restrooms for people using the Bob Jones Trail, and also for the Octagon Barn Center. It gives us greater capacity once those bathrooms are functioning. But the idea behind it is to be a trailhead for the Bob Jones Trail. So that's all I have, unless you have other questions. And again, a reminder that there's information about the Land Conservancy and Bay Laurel out on the piano, if you want to get some on your way out. Seth, oh.
If you're interested, how can you get involved with the Land Conservancy?
Well, that's easy to do. You can call us, email us. The information is on the newsletter. We have programs where we utilize volunteers for a variety of different programs. We have a trail maintenance crew that meets every Thursday out at the Pismo Preserve. We have a number of committees that utilize volunteers also. So it's just a matter of making contact. We hired a young woman just this year permanently on our staff to coordinate volunteers. And she actually came to us through AmeriCorps. She graduated from Cal Poly and joined AmeriCorps for 1 year and acted as a volunteer coordinator, and then we hired her to continue that effort for us. So we do have the ability to engage people if you're at all interested. And you had a question, sir.
Is that going to be a 2-lane trail?
And I'm sure at least 8 feet, if not wider. Yeah, the idea is to, like what exists now. I don't know if you've been on that trail.
It's gonna be way better than what exists now.
Yeah, I mean in terms of wider.
Wider, yeah.
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 But
That
kind
was
of
the-
10 feet is about a minimum width, because you can't have two-way traffic that way.
I was wondering if there was going to be a bike trail and a hiking trail alongside of it.
I don't know, Kathy, do you know if there'll be?
No, I think it's gonna be just class 1 trail, but it'll be much wider. That old Bob Jones was built a long time ago. Nobody knew how much it would be loved. And you have the construction of the San Luis Creek there and the development, so it will probably be twice as wide as the current one.
Great. Well, again, thank you for having me. One other thing, back in the late 80s or early 90s, Joe Sable, who many of you I'm sure know, and I owned Bay Laurel at the time, we hosted the rare fruit growers at the nursery, I think during bare root season, when we had all of our bare root fruit trees there. We had a meeting, and there were probably about 15 members or so back then, 30 years ago, 35 years ago. But Joe was relentless in, completing the idea of fruit growing and anyway, it was just fun. So this is kind of a second awakening for me. I'm amazed at the number of people that are involved. Jenny told me there would be 30 to 50 people here probably, and that's a long way from the 15 or so that came up to the nursery back in the late 80s or early 90s when we had it. So anyway, it's great to be here. It's great to see you all, and thank you very much. I'm going to, I brought a couple of maps, and I should have handed these out earlier. One is the orchard down the apple orchard, and the other one is the property along San Luis Creek that we have. And I'll hand this out, and you can pass them around and get a better idea of what we have. Okay, Seth, thanks.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Fantastic. I'm excited about doing some of those hikes.
Oh, yeah.
Those hikes sometimes a year, sneaking out there. Great opportunity to participate in public lands.